Manever I say ma PENDREAM TV. PENDREAM TV there, Ochere dem yopo.
Anyway, Uncle Z, you know, last week you were here and you expressed your opinion about what your opinion about the announcement by the majority leader that the Kotoka International Airport was going to be renamed and it was going to be given the name Accra International Airport. In principle, you said on this platform that you didn't have anything against that. The only issue you had was the reasons that was given. When Mama Yariga said that, look, the land is for the Accra people, it was for them, give it back to them and so on. You thought it was a bad reason, simpliciter. Now, subsequent to that, there have been all kinds of public commentary on this matter, and there's one that I found very interesting. I thought that I would just play for you to. Bright, if the video is ready, I want Kwesi Pratt to watch this because there's some matters that borders on history, who Dr. Kwame Nkrumah was, what kind of leadership he offered this country. The 1960 Constitution, was that meant to make him a life president? Issues about PDA, the Preventive Detention Act, and so on and so forth, and all the other matters that have come up. So I want you to watch this video and then let me know what you think about it. Please, let's watch this video.
If you look at it critically, it's becoming very obvious that what all this is about settling political scores. It has nothing to do with renaming an airport.
Really?
It has everything to do with settling a major political part of our history, which is the sanctity and the 100% goodness of our first president and the illustrious Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. The point of the history is that since Nkrumah died, he has become much bigger than when he was alive. In the year 2000, the British Broadcasting Corporation, which did the survey, and in that survey, many of us as university students voted for Kwame Nkrumah because he was competing with Nelson Mandela, and Nelson Mandela was South African. And we didn't understand how the African story of the century can be told without the emasculation of colonialism and imperialism. And you can't attribute that to Mandela. The removal of colonialism, imperialism, and the fight against neocolonialism is certainly Nkrumah's fight. So we felt that it is actually unfair to compare Nelson Mandela to Kwame Nkrumah. We even thought that John Mensah Saba had done more than Nelson Mandela for Africa, but that's beside the point. So Nkrumah then ends up by the year 2001, 2002 as this ultimate political hero who has no blemish. Now, since 2017, at the outset of Akufo-Addo's government, he began to demonstrate a certain penchant for the history of Ghana. In his maiden independence speech, and this was the first time it happened on Independence Day, he almost gave a history lecture to the audience at the Independence Square, to the point where it was becoming very long. There has been some concerns then at that time about that, and I got personally involved because I attended a forum at the Socialist Forum to discuss these things on the celebration of 24th February, which is always the big day. 24th February is the day Nkrumah was overthrown. So this year, the overthrow of Nkrumah is going to be 60 years long. And it had always been planned by some of these actors that on the 60th anniversary of Nkrumah, let us restore Nkrumah's image 100% over Ghana. This Kotoka's name on an important edifice like the airport is the remaining last leg of the nemesis of Nkrumah that must be taken away, because they have been able to establish Nkrumah as the hero and the 100% hero since the BBC issue. Now, what we have been pointing out is that they started by arguing that Kotoka is a coup maker. Okay. And then that argument appears to be shifting. If you listen to Ambassador Kwesi Pratt, he was concerned that Mahama Yariga is turning this whole thing into a tribal matter. That what is Accra and what is all that? It's not about a tribal matter. It is about removing the image of some coup maker, as they say. Okay, you just talked about Arthur Kennedy, who then mentioned the coup maker thing relating to Rawlings. And then we also know about Franklin Kujo, who put up how Nkrumah's regime was murderous. What we would like Ghanaians to see, and at the end of the day, the government will make its decision. And then we will have to decide whether it's a political decision that we vote on the next time or whatever we do. But we have to, we cannot ignore history. We have to make obeisance to history. The history is that from 1960 up to the time Nkrumah was overthrown in 1966, He was a despot. He was not good for Ghana. He was terrible for Ghana. The 1960 constitution, which Nkrumah put together, which I have in front of me, has Nkrumah's name buried in the constitution, Article 10.
Correct.
Where it is talking about Kwame Nkrumah as president of Ghana. So it's talking about Kwame Nkrumah as president of Ghana in that Article 10. There is also a bit more. It is in this same 1960 constitution that Nkrumah decided that there was an amendment to the 1960 constitution in 1964. And if you look at the amendments, it will interest you to know that the amendments that was provided in the 1964 amendment included the fact that Kwame Nkrumah was now able to dismiss judges. Yes. And also, yes, he was able to dismiss judges. And also, the national flag of Ghana was changed. He also banned all political parties in 1964. And people were imprisoned. Preventive Detention Act was created in 1958. You might not think of it as a bad law. It is only the usage that you can criticize. Because what happened is that Nkrumah had been attacked by a bomb. And it was becoming very scary between Nkrumah and the opposition. The violence was growing on the part of the opposition, I must say. And Nkrumah needed something that will allow the intelligence agencies to work. So that's why PDA was set up. So in fact, if you look at the usage of PDA, between 1958, when it was set up, and about 1961, it was minimal. But from 1961 to 1964, the PDA was railroading everywhere and every home was afraid. This was the state of affairs in Ghana. Now, because we are not accustomed to our history that much, and all of us, many of us talking today, were not born in that time, we all don't know that, and we are railroaded into Nkrumah as something.
That's a situation where you could be arrested and put in custody without the intervention of a court.
Not just without the intervention of the courts, but on the basis that the Minister for Interior is thinking in his mind that you are preparing to do something wrong. This is a fundamental departure from the processes of the jurisprudence of the criminal court. It's just a fundamental and a wicked departure from it.
All right. Okay, so apparently you are the one behind the renaming of Kotoka International Airport, Socialist Forum. Are you still the General Secretary?
Yeah, I am, but tomorrow, I mean, this is the second time I'm watching this clip. And I can't help but to feel pity for Paul. You know, I really feel pity for Paul Adom Ochere. I mean, his total disregard of facts is shocking. I speak with Paul. As a matter of fact, Paul is actually my relative. He's married to my cousin. Okay. And I speak with Paul quite often. Paul knows, clearly, he knows. It is not that he doesn't know. Paul knows that I have never been an ambassador. And Paul knows that I will never accept an ambassadorial position. And yet, he keeps referring to me as Ambassador Kwesi Pratt. For a certain effect, I mean, this level of dishonesty, it's so shocking. And it runs through all of his presentations. You know, I mean, this one fact, Paul knows that I've not been an ambassador before. I am not an ambassador. I would never be an ambassador. And yet, he insists on calling me ambassador for some effect. This is pathetic. You know, this is really pathetic. But let's put that aside, you know. Paul, on this claim, makes a claim that if Oliver Vomau had lived in the Nkrumah era, he would have been consigned to a prison. I think that's most unfair to Oliver. Most unfair. That comparison is most unfair to Oliver. What has Oliver done? All he has done is to criticize government and to manifest his disagreement with government. This is not what happened at Nkrumah. How many children has Oliver killed with grenades? So to equate Oliver to those who killed innocent children at the stadium and some places and so on is most unfair to Oliver. You understand? But that is for Oliver to deal with. It's not for me to deal with. That equation is horrible, clearly unacceptable. Okay. Now, there's a guy who has written a very brilliant article, and I recommend it to everybody. His name is Echo Nelson. I told you about him this morning, explaining all of this. What is clear to me is that we need to emphasize the study of history, especially by our leaders and public commentators. Because Paul's presentation is an indication of the extent to which our understanding of history is warped and not based on facts. Okay. One, let's take the allegations he makes around the Preventive Detention Act. Okay. And he sees the Preventive Detention Act as an act of a tyrant. Nkrumah, who does not believe in the rule of law, and so on. Now, what is the reality? The reality is that today, there is no country in the world, and I emphasize that, which does not have Preventive Detention Act in one form or the other. So are we to say that today, all the governments in the world are headed by tyrants? If you take the United States of America, after 9/11, why? One of the laws which came into effect was the Patriots Act. You know that, and you, the two of you, should know that better. Yeah. What it does is that it allows for detention without charge and trial in situations of national emergency. The United Kingdom has the same law. Japan has the same law. China has the same law. Every country in the world has the same law. And these laws are the equivalent of the Preventive Detention Act, which was passed under Nkrumah. So you need to understand that very clearly. In any case, those who overthrew Nkrumah replaced the Preventive Detention Act with the Protective Custody Law, which in essence was the same as the Preventive Detention Act. Talk to the Nkrumah supporters, the ministers and so on, who were dumped into prison. Were they charged? Were they tried? No. Many of them, including pregnant women, were dumped into prison without charge and without trial, under the Protective Custody Law. So let's look at the essence of the law. And if you look at the essence of the law, it was the same. Now today, and happily you are here, we are in a democratic dispensation. All of us agree. It has its defects as well. We are in a democratic dispensation. Take the 1992 Constitution. There are provisions in the 1992 Constitution dealing with national emergencies and the declaration of war. When those situations arise, the president will confer on the president emergency powers, which enables the president to order arrest and detention without charge or trial because of the national emergency. Indeed, under Mr. Rawlings, I think it was in 1986 or thereabout, something very significant happened. The PNDC passed the Habeas Corpus Amendment Decree. The effect of the Habeas Corpus Amendment Decree was to make nonsense of the laws on habeas corpus. The law of habeas corpus simply says that if somebody is arrested and detained, you can go to court and the court can then order for the production of the person, the body of the person, and so on. Now, the Habeas Corpus Amendment Decree passed by Rawlings created a situation where all that the state had to do was to go to court and say that the person had been arrested and detained for national security reasons. Finish. Matter closed. This was under Jerry Rawlings in the 1980s and so on. Okay. Now, after 9/11, You know the number of people who were arrested around the world and dumped on the Guantanamo Bay prison in Cuba by the United States of America, without charge and without trial. Who was to argue that the U.S. was not under a state of emergency? Who made that argument? And who challenged the democratic credentials, the supposed democratic credentials of the United States of America? Did Paul and his cohorts challenge the democratic credentials of the United States of America? They did not. In any case, talking about the historical record, Nkrumah was in power for 9 years. And check this record. In the 9 years that Nkrumah was in power, where there were various attempts to kill him, to bomb him, there were killing of innocent citizens, including school children and so on. Do you know that only one person was executed? Check the record. And the person who was executed was Sergeant Ametewe, who had attempted to assassinate him at the Flagstaff House. All those who were caught for exploding bombs in stadium and so on, none of them was executed. This is the record of a tyrant, according to Paul Adom Ochere and his friends. The record of the tyrant in Nkrumah is that those who tried to kill him, who bombed his house at the Malata market, tried to kill him and his mother, none of them was executed except for Sergeant Ametewe. And Sergeant Ametewe was actually convicted of the crime and sentenced to death by hanging by a competent court of jurisdiction. This is the record. In any case, the assassination attempts on Nkrumah, they began at a time when Ghana was a fully fledged multi-party democracy. So nobody can justify those assassination attempts on Nkrumah by reference to the 1960 Constitution. And so before 1960 Constitution, first of all, the first coup d'etat, which was planned by Awate, Aram Ponsa, and co., occurred in 1958. 2 years before the 1960 Constitution. So what was the justification for that coup d'etat? The first attempt on Nkrumah, I guess, was in 1957 or 1958 at the Malata market. You know, opposite the Malata market, there used to be a brick house where Nkrumah used to live with his mother, Nyaniba. It was attacked with bombs. You understand? There is the Lucas House affair. Lucas House affair is very, if you study our history, you cannot ignore Lucas House. There was a celebration of Nkrumah's birthday, and young people, young pioneer members and so on, had gone to celebrate. When they were leaving the celebration in a procession, opponents of Nkrumah dropped bombs amongst the children. They dropped bombs. Children who were celebrating Nkrumah's birthday. What crime had they committed? And the Accra Sports Stadium incident, where they dropped bombs on the Accra Sports Stadium, killing many school children, including Ya Asantwa, who only died recently, who used to live at Dansuma Estate. I'm sure all of you know that story. You know, under these circumstances, were we expecting Nkrumah to call his opponents and present them with bouquets of flowers and kiss them on both cheeks? What is this? By the way, this reference to the one-party state, that Nkrumah created a one-party state and so on, I refer everybody to the testimony of Joe Appiah, who was an opponent of Nkrumah. Joe Appiah has written extensively about the declaration of the one-party state. I read it last night. Joe Appiah says that Nkrumah invited him to the Flagstaff House for a meeting, a 3-person meeting. The 3 people who were in that meeting were Kofi Baku, Nkrumah himself, and Joe Appiah. And Nkrumah discussed with him the need to establish a government of national unity. And that government of national unity was to be led by Joe Appiah himself and Nkrumah, and they were to bring on board that government elements of the UP. It was a government which was going to be created by the UP and the CPP together. This is the historical record. It's available. I can send it to you later. This is Joe Appiah's confession, okay? And that, in the course of this discussion, Joe Appiah requested that the meeting should be enlarged. So eventually it moved from a 3-member meeting to a 7-member meeting, and that Nkrumah left for Moscow on an official assignment and continued communicating with him. It was during this period that the intelligence found evidence of an attempt to kill Nkrumah and to overthrow his government. Listen very carefully. This is 1959 to 60. So it was on the basis of the plot to kill Nkrumah when he was trying to bring the opposition into government so that they could govern Ghana together, that the one-party state was declared without the opposition. The original intention was to build a government of national unity which brought everybody together. Paul doesn't have that history. He hasn't read enough. And I would advise Paul to educate himself. To be abreast with all of these different, strands and so on, and stop talking like an ignorant, I want to be very careful with my words. I want to be very careful with my words. Complete ignorance. And he displays this ignorance with confidence, bravado, and so on. What else did he say? What else did he say? The coup. Who organized the coup? It is not true that the 1966 coup was organized by Kotoka. That's another falsehood. Now, Moro, listen to me very carefully. And I said that last week on this very platform. I had the privilege of interviewing one of the architects or one of the people who we know was involved in the 1966 coup. And I interviewed J.W.K. Halley. No, A.K. Deku. I interviewed A.K. Deku. I told the story last week. And if you listen to A.K. Deku, the hub of the conspiracy to overthrow Nkrumah in 1966, the hub, the Ghanaian hub, was led by a Major Kwesi, who was a military officer working at the 37 Military Hospital. In fact, it was in his house that the conspirators met. Halley, Deku, and many others were recruited to join the conspiracy. Okay? Indeed, that coup was organized. First of all, it was instigated, sponsored, and organized by the Central Intelligence Agency of the United States of America. And the evidence is there. It's in black and white. Just read it. Look, the Socialist Movement of Ghana has published a book titled The Great Deception, How the CIA Overthrew Nkrumah. That book has 2 components. One is the raw declassified documents of the CIA about how it organized the coup. This is the CIA itself talking about how it organized the coup. And then there is commentary by persons who know, like Mahoney and others. And so, if you read that book, you are left in no doubt about who organized the coup and why the coup was organized. In fact, the coup was not organized because Nkrumah had become a dictator and a tyrant and so on. It's false. You see, on September 21, 1960, I think, the British High Commissioner in Ghana then, he was called A.W. Snelling. A.W. Snelling sent a cable to his home office, urging his home office to speed up preparations for the coup d'etat, and he wrote in black and white that it was time to get rid of Nkrumah, and that if they didn't get rid of Nkrumah, British interest in Africa would suffer. That was the only reason for the coup. Foreign intelligence agencies conspiring to overthrow a Ghanaian government because that Ghanaian government was committed to the protection of the national interest. Because that Ghanaian government was loyal to the resolution of the 1945 Congress, Pan-African Congress in Manchester, which has called on Africa to struggle for national independence, to control its own resources and exploit its own resources for the benefit of its people, and to build continental union, a continental union guided by the principles of scientific socialism. This is what the West was afraid of. This is what the West didn't want. This is why they staged the 1966 coup, and they themselves have commented on it. Beyond this, Paul should find time to read John Stockwell. John Stockwell. John Stockwell was one of key CIA agents who eventually rebelled and has written his account of why and how Nkrumah was overthrown. Then there's Philip Agee. Stockwell, of course, died in exile and so on. But there's also Philip Agee, whose accounts are clear about how the coup was organized, who organized it, and so on. But beyond that, it's also the book. It's called, the title of the book is JFK, Ordeal in Africa. And that book was authored by Jack D. Mahoney. Jack D. Mahoney was the son of a former U.S. ambassador to Ghana. And he details how the Central Intelligence Agency of the U.S. subverted the Nkrumah government and prepared the grounds for the coup d'etat. So those of us who are opposed to the 1966 coup are not opposed to the 1966 coup only because it's a coup d'etat. We are opposed to the 1966 coup because it was a manifestation of a Western intelligence conspiracy against the independence project, against the national aspirations of African people. It was a subversion of Ghanaian sovereignty. It was intended to bring us to where we are today. It was intended to push us onto the path of the neoliberal order, to accept the dictates of the IMF and the World Bank, to devalue the national currency within 10 years by more than 22,000%, to put us on a path in which in 1983, 300,000 workers lost their jobs. This is why we are opposed to the 1966 coup. It is not for any fanciful reason, and so on. In any case, Moro, Paul claims that it is the socialist movement of Ghana which is behind this book. Of course, the socialist movement of Ghana condemns the 1966 coup and everything else that arose out of the 1966 coup and so on. But that movement has not even issued one statement in its 30-year life calling for the change of the name Kotoka International Airport. Not one statement. I don't know where Paul is getting all this information from. You understand? And all of this emphasizes the need for Ghana as a country to place some emphasis on the teaching of history. Because if we don't, we are going to get leaders like this who don't know anything about our history, who on the basis of their own conjecture will make policy. And those policies will be disastrous because they have no basis in the science of history and the science of thinking. That is the problem. You understand? It's pathetic. Look, me, I am 2,000% for the change of the name. My reason for the change of the name is not because Kotoka staged a coup or that Kotoka is an ever or so. My reason for the name change is that 1966 represented an affront to national sovereignty. Because 1966 was a direct subversion of the national interest, our national identity and so on. And we cannot honor the day in which a foreign power and its allies decided to overthrow a popularly elected government in Ghana. That is my point. And you see, for those who talk about repression and so on about Nkrumah, their knowledge of history is very weak. Look, me as a child, as a child. I was a school-going child. I saw with my own eyes. I was not told. I did not read it from books. I saw boy Moses, an envoy of Nkrumah, put in a cage, in an iron cage, tied to a truck and driven around the streets of Accra. Those are the people who believed in democracy and human rights. They caught another human being, put him in a cage, iron cage, tied him to a truck, and drove him on the principal streets of Accra. They should stop wasting our time and wasting our years.
Dedi kama mamena PENDREAM TV ase. Na so far so good. Say open online portal e wo Ghana. Nipa share, nipa follow, nipa comment here. To my best of knowledge, without any biases, PENDREAM TV.